what do we understand by modernity? One part of modernity has to do with Western thinking, post-Socratic philosophy, based on absolute values, essentialism, etc. Another part is based on the Greco-Roman tradition, the classics, establishing a common culture. Another part is based on the Judeo-Christian tradition, which establishes also the idea of an absolute authority, divine God, etc., revealed text. Because they are revealed texts, they cannot be contradicted. That leads to a concept of permanent absolute truth that can be discerned and be accepted by everybody, and also be a heretic in the religious tradition. As a result of the Protestant Reformation and a series of religious wars, tolerance was born as a part of political thinking in Western Europe, in the sense that people could do what they wanted in their own territory, as long as they didn't try to export it, or people could do what they wanted at home, as long as they didn't try to close it to the public. And there was a concept of the separation of state, church and state, public and private spheres, the idea of rights that could not be violated, etc. All this, of course, corresponded to what the Spanish called the Age of Discovery, and what the Latin Americans called the Conquest. The modern scientific revolution in the 17th century did more to establish the idea of verifiable, objective, neutral, absolute truth that nobody could deny. In political philosophy, a revolution occurred to give political power to those who are producing economic power by eliminating monarchy and divine right kings, which required a revision of what people are, creation of the individual. The individual was created as a subject during the period of the 18th century revolutions. Farmers free, this idea that people make their decisions on the basis of reason, an abstract concept of the individual which makes no reference to whether it's a man or a woman, a child or an adult, grandfather or grandson. And no relationship between the roles or duties of the individual as opposed to the rights. Now, out of the individual political rights that were designed to allow the burghers, the people living in the towns, to exercise and protect their own rights, we got such important ideas for Western modernity as liberté, fraternité, the rights of man, etc., like Autonòma. But the same Enlightenment period, which defined a world order based on nation states which are treated as if they were individuals with rights, acting as individuals with rights, also brought with it, in philosophy, the idea of universal reason, the categorical imperative. If reason is one, it's absolute and it's unique. Anybody who disagrees has to be wrong, because they're not being reasonable, which is giving a philosophical touch to what religion had tried to establish. This same enlightenment produced Smithism and Marxism, capitalism and communism. And one of the contributions of the Enlightenment was laissez-faire, laissez-passer, which is in fact a translation of the Chinese concept, wu wei, which was introduced in Holland, Switzerland, France, and other countries during the 18th century. And laissez-faire and les droits de l'homme had different effects around the world, because in the rest of the world, in the colonies, there were no droits, there were no rights of man. And laissez-faire was used to justify what would later be blatant periods. At the same time, Marxism is also a result of the Enlightenment, in the sense that Marx was defining scientific laws to explain the social phenomena. And therefore, Marxism also could give itself the status of absolute objective truth. And that's the way it was sold to the rest of the world. That is, it was sold as a scientific truth, not as an ideology. Liberalism, liberal democracy. We can summarize what the roots of modern modernity in Europe and America are with these concepts. But what happened in the rest of the world? In the Chinese tradition, a country was defined by its economy and by its self-defense, agriculture and an army. The Chinese written character for country includes a reference to farm, agriculture, a reference to soldiers bearing weapons surrounded by a border. And the tradition of government developed in China was based on agriculture and army, strength and economy. It was also based on the group, for various reasons I won't go into. The collective responsibility took priority over individual responsibility. The word ren is a person next to the number 2, which implies that there is no such thing as a unipersonal society. There is no one-person society. There is always more than one person. So the definition of the individual is in context with other people, not as an individual. Therefore, the idea of the autonomous individual with rights versus social roles with duties is a contrast between the Chinese tradition, that people are born into social roles. And in these social roles, they have a series of responsibilities toward others. To cooperation rather than competition, solidarity rather than self-interest, collective responsibility and mutual surveillance. The center of China as center, periphery as the rest of the world, and a fiduciary hierarchy. It's really clear that Confucian societies have a strong hierarchy. What's not so clear is that it's a hierarchy based on mutual responsibilities. In the sense that the father has a responsibility to take care of the children have a a responsibility to obey the father and support the father. But someday the father might be too old and will depend upon the children. Someday the children will be mothers and fathers. So as people go through life, their role in the fiduciary relationship changes. They can be benefactor at one point, beneficiary at another, and change. Therefore, there is no constant role, as opposed to the Western-style modernity, which is based on an essentialist definition of the individual in the abstract. In the East Asian tradition, there is always a consciousness of a person's role in society, which implies duties and responsibilities. Meritocracy. I think this has been underrated in terms of studying what's happening in China today. For 2,000 years, the Chinese empire governed itself through a bureaucracy based during at least 1,500 years in the election of officials on the basis of examinations. It was on the basis of their intellectual merit. And this created a structure in which there was continuity and quantification by people who had demonstrated that in their generation they were the most brilliant minds. Now, that has simply been taken over by the Communist Party. The role of the scholars in the Communist Party today is the same as the role of the mandarins and the bureaucracy in the past. But it's also curious to see that the same thing has happened in the European Union. Some Chinese political scientists refer to the European Union as an empire-like nation-state. Now, in the European Union, we have a legislative branch, an executive branch, we have a judiciary branch, which are all typical of Western, modern, liberal democracy. But we also have something called the European Commission, which is a bureaucracy which people can join by passing exams, and which serves to provide continuity and planning for a large number of very different nation-states. In other words, the European Union, in its evolution toward a supranational structure, has had to reinvent what the Chinese had from the beginning. We might say that the Chinese have yet to invent the separation of church and state, the separation of the party from the state. They've yet to separate the judiciary from the executive to the legislative, etc. But there seems to be something necessary in governing large territories that requires a kind of bureaucracy based on merit, which provides stability and planning.